Imagine this. One phone call, not from a banker, not from a trader, but from the most powerful office on earth, the Oval Office. A call that would end 6,000 years of real, tangible wealth and replace it with something entirely new. That call, in the summer of 1971, didn't just change America's economy. It quietly rewired the entire financial system of the world. What if I told you that in just one weekend, the connection between money and real gold, a link that had defined human civilization since ancient Mesopotamia, was severed forever? Before we dive deep into this story, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this video from? To understand what happened in 1971, we have to go back to the aftermath of World War II, to a small town in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods. In 1944, representatives from 44 Allied nations gathered there to design a new global financial system. The US came out of the war as the richest country on Earth, holding more than 2/3 of the world's gold reserves. So it was decided, the US dollar would become the world's reserve currency, and it would be backed by gold at a fixed rate of 35 per ounce. This meant that any country could exchange its dollars for gold on demand. That promise, the convertibility of dollars into gold, was the foundation of global trust. It was the reason every other nation pegged their currencies to the dollar, and why the dollar itself became as good as gold. But there was a catch, one that would take less than 3 decades to explode. By the 1960s, America's financial situation had started to crumble from within. The Vietnam War, massive defense spending, and President Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs all required billions of dollars. The problem? The US was printing far more money than it had gold to back it. Foreign countries began to notice. They realized the US had promised more gold than it could possibly deliver. By 1971, the United States held around $10 billion worth of gold, but foreign governments held over $50 billion in US dollars. If even a few major nations demanded gold for their dollars, America's entire gold reserve could vanish. And one country decided to call America's bluff. That country was France. Under President Charles de Gaulle, France sent warships to New York Harbor, not for battle, but to collect gold bars from the Federal Reserve. That's right. France literally exchanged shiploads of paper dollars for solid gold. Soon after, other nations, including Britain and Switzerland, began considering the same. The United States was cornered. August 1971. President Richard Nixon was under enormous pressure. Inflation was climbing, unemployment was rising, and America's trade deficit was at a record high. That when Nixon called a secret meeting at Camp David with his top advisors, including Treasury Secretary John Connally, Federal Reserve Chairman Arthur Burns, and a young economic strategist named Paul Volcker. Behind closed doors, over one tense weekend, they made a decision that would shock the world. On Sunday, August 15, 1971, Nixon went live on national television. His words were calm, but what he announced would end the gold-backed monetary system forever. I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold. That temporary suspension, which Nixon said would protect the American dollar, was never lifted. It became permanent. And with that single sentence, 6,000 years of real wealth, of gold as the foundation of money, came to an end. Until that night, the US government had legally promised to exchange dollars for gold upon request. After that night, money became fiat currency, paper-backed not by gold, but by government decree. The word fiat literally means, let it be done. It's money that has value simply because the government says so. This was the beginning of what historians call the Nixon shock. For the first time in history, every major currency on Earth became disconnected from physical reality. No gold, no silver, just promises. The dollar was now based purely on confidence, and on the belief that the US government would manage its value responsibly. But confidence, as every banker knows, is fragile. The reaction across the world was immediate and chaotic. Markets trembled, foreign exchange rates swung wildly. Within months, the system of fixed exchange rates that had governed world trade since 1944 completely collapsed. By 1973, currencies were allowed to float freely against each other, creating the modern forex market we know today. The dollar began to lose value rapidly. Inflation in the US surged above 6%, and gold, now free from its fixed price, shot upward from $35 to over $120 per ounce within just a few years. America's trading partners were furious. France called it an abuse of trust. Britain called it economic warfare, but Nixon's administration saw it differently. They believed the US had saved itself, that without this drastic step, the nation's gold reserves would have vanished entirely, and the dollar might have collapsed. In truth, both were right. The world economy would never be the same again. That one decision in 1971 didn't just change how money worked, it changed how power worked. Because now, whoever could print money could control the world. It allowed governments to finance wars without raising taxes. It allowed central banks to manipulate interest rates. It created the illusion of endless growth, while quietly inflating away the value of ordinary people, SS savings. The temporary suspension became the foundation of a new era, the era of debt-based capitalism. From that day forward, money was no longer a store of real wealth. It was a tool of control. In August 1971, President Richard Nixon temporarily suspended the dollar's link to gold. That one phone call, that one televised announcement, didn't just rewrite financial history, it redefined what money even meant. But what happened next was something no one predicted. The gold standard was gone, trust was broken, and the world needed a new system, fast. The days following Nixon's announcement were chaotic. Foreign governments demanded explanations. The IMF scrambled to stabilize markets, and economists around the world warned that the end of gold convertibility could trigger a total collapse of international trade. Remember, for nearly 3 decades, the Bretton Woods system had ensured stable exchange rates, which allowed businesses, banks, and nations to plan, trade, and invest confidently. Now, all of that was gone overnight. Countries started doing whatever they could to protect their currencies. Some devalued, others imposed capital controls. It was economic anarchy, and everyone was waiting to see what the United States would do next. But Nixon and his team were already several moves ahead. When Nixon cut the dollar's link to gold, he created a problem. Without gold, why would the rest of the world still trust the dollar? The answer came 2 years later, in 1973, through another secret negotiation, this time not in Washington, but in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Nixon's administration and his successor, President Gerald Ford, sent diplomats and Treasury officials to strike a deal with the House of Saud. The offer was simple but revolutionary. The U.S. would guarantee military protection for Saudi Arabia and support its monarchy. In exchange, the Saudis, and by extension, OPEC, would agree to sell oil exclusively in U.S. dollars. It was genius. By tying oil to the dollar, the U.S. had effectively replaced gold with oil as the foundation of global money. Because every country on earth needed oil, and to buy oil they now needed dollars. This became the petrodollar system, and it ensured that global demand for the U.S. dollar would remain permanent. It also gave Washington an incredible weapon, control over the world's energy payments, and by extension, over global finance itself. But this new system came with a price, one that ordinary people would pay. Without gold to limit how much money could be created, central banks were free to print virtually unlimited currency. Between 1971 and 1980, the U.S. money supply more than doubled. Inflation skyrocketed. The price of gold, once fixed at $35 an ounce, soared to over $800 by 1980. Everyday Americans felt the pain directly. Gas prices quadrupled, food costs soared, savings lost value. Economists called it stagflation, a deadly mix of stagnant growth and high inflation. It was something the world hadn't seen before, and it exposed the dark side of the fiat system. For centuries, gold had acted as a leash on governments. Now, that leash was gone, and money itself became limitless. By the 1980s, the US had learned to weaponize this new system. Because the world needed dollars to buy oil, other countries were forced to hold large reserves of US currency and US government bonds. In simple terms, the rest of the world sent real goods, oil, cars, electronics, to America, and America paid with paper dollars created out of thin air. This phenomenon is known as the exorbitant privilege. It gave the US the power to run massive deficits without collapsing, because global demand for dollars kept everything afloat. By 1985, under President Ronald Reagan, America had fully embraced debt-driven capitalism. Interest rates were manipulated, credit was easy, and Wall Street entered its golden age. The US could borrow endlessly, finance global wars, and fund expansion, all thanks to a system built on one decision made in 1971. But beneath the surface, something darker was forming, a global dependency that would eventually come back to haunt everyone. As the petrodollar system spread, every major economy began accumulating US debt as their reserve asset. By the 1990s, central banks in Asia, the Middle East, and Europe held trillions of dollars in US Treasury bonds. This made America richer, but it also made the world dangerously interconnected. When the US sneezed, everyone else caught the cold. The Asian financial crisis of 1997, the dot-com crash of 2000, and the global financial crisis of 2008, all of these were amplified by the same foundation, a world built on fiat money and endless debt. And every time a crisis hit, the solution was the same: print more money. This cycle, started in 1971, created what many economists call the illusion of prosperity. We weren't getting richer. Our money was just getting weaker. Let's step back for a second. What began as a temporary suspension of gold convertibility turned into a permanent transformation of civilization. In ancient times, gold and silver represented labor, energy, and time, real effort converted into value. But today, money is created with a keyboard stroke. Think about that. 6,000 years of human trade, from the first coins of Mesopotamia to the gold coins of Rome, were all backed by something real. After 1971, money became faith. Faith in governments, in central banks, and in the illusion that paper can hold value forever. Every major economic challenge we face today, from inflation to income inequality to national debt to currency wars, can trace its roots back to that single weekend in August 1971. That was the moment real wealth, tangible, earned, scarce, was replaced by symbolic wealth, unlimited, borrowed, and easily manipulated. Fast forward to today, the cracks are showing again. Nations like China, Russia, and India are now seeking alternatives to the dollar. The BRICS alliance is experimenting with gold-backed trade settlements, and even the petrodollar system is starting to fade, as Saudi Arabia and others explore deals outside the dollar framework. It's as if history is trying to correct itself, because no empire and no currency can defy the laws of real value forever. What started as one phone call in 1971 might soon end with another one, this time signaling the dawn of a new financial era. So the next time you hold a dollar in your hand, remember this: it's not backed by gold, it's not backed by oil, it's backed by trust, and by the belief that tomorrow someone else will still accept it. That belief is what holds the modern world together. And if it ever fades, everything built since 1971 could come crashing down. If you found this story eye-opening, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still thinks the dollar has real value. And don't forget, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching this from? Because this story isn't over yet.